It was 2:47 a.m. on a freezing January night in Toronto. The flames were already reaching the second floor when Captain James Mitchell pulled up to the house on Maple Street. It was 2:47 a.m. on a freezing January night in Toronto. Snow covered the road, but the house in front of him was burning out of control. Fire was pouring out of the windows, and thick smoke filled the air. Then he heard the screams from inside the house, and in that moment, James knew this was not a routine call. Something was very wrong. James had been a firefighter for 12 years. He had seen people on the worst days of their lives. He had seen fear, pain, panic, and loss. He believed he was ready for anything. But as he stood in front of that burning house, listening to those screams, he felt a deep sense that this fire was different. The dispatch had reported that a family of 5 was trapped on the second floor and that the fire was caused by an electrical failure and spreading fast. James grabbed his axe and oxygen tank and signaled to his team. "We go in through the front," he said firmly. 2 minutes max, in and out. The moment he broke through the front door, intense heat hit him like a wall. Even with the oxygen mask, breathing was hard. Smoke was so thick that he could barely see his own hands. The stairs were already damaged, flames crawling up the walls, and the sound of wood cracking filled the house. Somewhere above, he could hear children crying. His heart raced as he moved forward, knowing every second mattered. The structure could collapse at any moment. Then he heard something that stopped him for a brief second. It wasn't screaming, it wasn't crying. Someone was singing. The sound was calm, steady, and peaceful. James had never heard anything like that inside a burning house. He reached the second floor hallway, following the sound of the children. Smoke filled the space and fire was spreading fast. One bedroom door was closed, with smoke pouring out from underneath. James kicked the door open, and what he saw inside stayed with him forever. A woman wearing a headscarf was sitting on the floor, holding 4 children close to her. The youngest looked no more than 2 years old. The room was filling with smoke, and flames blocked the window from below. They were trapped. The woman should have been screaming for help. She should have been panicking. Instead, her eyes were closed, her face calm, and her lips were moving as she softly recited words in a language James did not understand. "Ma'am, we need to go now," James shouted. She opened her eyes, looked at him, and smiled. In the middle of the fire, she smiled. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Allah sent you." James didn't have time to think about her words. He grabbed the 2 youngest children and signaled his partner Rodriguez to take the older ones. "Ma'am, come on, we have seconds," he said urgently. She stood up calmly, helping her children toward the firefighters, still reciting those words. There was no panic in her voice, no fear in her movements, only a strange and powerful calm. They made it down the stairs just as the second floor ceiling began to collapse behind them. Outside, the cold air hit James hard. Paramedics rushed forward and took the children. They were coughing, but they were alive. The mother quickly checked each child, touching their faces and whispering to them. James removed his mask, his hands shaking from adrenaline. He had done many rescues before, but this one felt different in a way he couldn't explain. Rodriguez walked over, breathing heavily, and said, "Did you see that? She was completely calm in there. I've never seen anything like it." James nodded, unable to take his eyes off the family. Moments later, the husband arrived, fell to his knees, and hugged his wife and children tightly. Everyone was crying now, but the woman still carried the same peaceful expression. Her name, James would later learn, was Amina. And that night on Maple Street was only the beginning of a change James never expected. 3 days passed, but James could not forget that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the fire on Maple Street. He saw the smoke, the flames, and most of all, the woman's face. That calm face in the middle of chaos. He had faced death many times in his career, but this moment stayed with him in a way nothing else ever had. His body was tired, but his mind would not rest. At work, James tried to focus on his duties, but his thoughts kept drifting back. He replayed the scene again and again. The singing inside the fire. The way Amina smiled when he reached her. The way she said, "Allah sent you," like it was the most natural thing in the world. James had saved lives before, but no one had ever spoken to him like that. At home, his wife Sarah noticed the change. One morning at breakfast, she watched him quietly stirring his coffee again and again. "You've been different since that Maple Street fire," she said gently. You barely sleep. You barely talk. What happened in there? James looked at her, trying to find the right words. I saw something I can't explain, he finally said. A kind of faith I don't understand. That was when James did something he had never done in his 12 years as a firefighter. He went back to the incident report and searched for the family's information. He told himself it was just a routine welfare check, just making sure they were okay after such a traumatic event. But deep down, he knew that wasn't the full truth. He needed answers. When he arrived at the temporary housing apartment, his heart was beating fast. He knocked on the door, unsure of what he would say. When Amina opened it and saw him standing there in civilian clothes, her face immediately lit up with a warm smile. Captain Mitchell, she said kindly, please come in. I was hoping to see you again so I could thank you properly. Inside, the apartment smelled of home-cooked food. The children were playing on the floor, laughing and smiling like nothing terrible had ever happened. James was surprised by how quickly they seemed to be healing. Amina's husband Omar stood up and shook James's hand firmly. His eyes were filled with emotion. You saved my family, Omar said. How can we ever repay you? James shook his head slowly. I was just doing my job, he replied. After a moment of silence, James spoke again. I have to ask something, he said, looking at Amina. In that room, when the fire was all around you, you were so calm. I've rescued many people from fires. Everyone is terrified. Everyone panics. But you didn't. What were you saying? Amina smiled softly and asked him to sit. I was reciting the Quran, she explained. The words of God. I was making dua, asking Allah to protect my children. James leaned forward. But you weren't afraid, he said. Amina nodded slowly. I was afraid, she admitted honestly. My heart was pounding. I could feel the heat. I knew we might die. But I also believe that Allah controls everything. If it was our time to return to Him, then that was His decision. And if it was not our time, then He would send help. She looked at James with meaning in her eyes. And He did. He sent you. Those words hit James deeply. You really believe someone is controlling everything? He asked quietly. Omar leaned forward. Captain Mitchell, he said gently, can I ask you something? In your career, how many times have you been in situations where you should have died, but somehow you didn't? James thought about it carefully. He remembered the building collapse years ago, where he moved just 1 second before a beam fell. He remembered a chemical fire where something told him to turn left instead of right. He remembered a car explosion where he paused for just a moment before stepping forward. More times than I can count, he admitted. And you think that was just luck? Omar asked. Just coincidence? James didn't answer right away. He had always believed it was training, instinct, experience. But there were moments he could not explain, moments where something unseen seemed to guide him. I don't know what I think anymore, James said honestly. Amina stood up and brought tea, placing it gently on the table. Captain Mitchell, she said softly, would you like to know the words that gave me peace that night? James nodded, unable to speak. She picked up a book from the shelf, a translation of the Quran, and opened it carefully. I was reciting Ayat al-Kursi, she said. It is a verse about Allah's protection. Then she read another verse, her voice calm and clear. Say, never will we be struck except by what Allah has written for us. He is our protector, and upon Allah the believers rely. As James listened, he felt chills run through his body. Amina closed the book and looked at him. I believe this with my whole heart, she said. That is why I had peace. James left the apartment hours later, his mind full of thoughts he had never allowed before. Omar had placed a copy of the Quran in his hands before he left. Just read it, Omar had said kindly, with an open heart. That night, after Sarah and the children were asleep, James sat alone and opened the book. He did not know where to begin, so he opened it randomly. His eyes landed on a verse about patience, fear, and loss. And for the first time in his life, James wondered if there was more to the fires he fought than just flames and smoke. The words James had read stayed with him long after he closed the book. He sat quietly in the living room, listening to the soft sound of the heater and the distant traffic outside. His house felt safe, warm, and calm, yet his heart felt restless. He thought about every fire he had fought, every scream he had heard, and every life he could not save. For years, he had carried those memories like heavy stones inside him. That night, for the first time, he wondered if there was a meaning behind all of it. Over the next few weeks, James began reading a little every night. He did not rush. Some verses confused him, some made him uncomfortable, and some made him stop and think for a long time. He noticed that the Quran spoke often about patience, about tests, about fear and loss being part of life. It did not promise an easy path, but it spoke of purpose. That idea slowly started to change something inside him. Fires were no longer just disasters. They were moments where people were tested, moments where courage, mercy, and faith appeared in ways he had never noticed before. At work, his fellow firefighters noticed a difference. James was still focused, still sharp, but calmer. During dangerous calls, when others panicked, he felt a strange steadiness in his chest. He still felt fear, but it no longer controlled him. Sometimes when the heat was unbearable and the smoke was thick, he remembered Amina's voice in that burning room. He remembered her calm, and it gave him strength. One evening after a long shift, James finally spoke openly to Sarah. They sat together after the children were asleep. He told her about the woman in the fire, about the verses he had read, about the questions growing inside him. Sarah listened quietly, holding his hand. "I don't know where this path will take you," she said softly, "but I see peace in you that wasn't there before." Her words meant more to him than she knew. Months passed. James kept reading, kept thinking, kept asking questions. He met with Omar several times, not as a firefighter, but as a man searching for understanding. They talked about life, about death, about control and surrender. James realized something important. Faith was not about never feeling fear. It was about trusting that even in fear, there was a greater plan. One quiet morning, James stood alone before sunrise. The city was silent. For the first time, he spoke words he had practiced many times in his heart. Words of belief, words of surrender. He felt no thunder, no sudden miracle, but he felt something deeper, a calm certainty, like the steady ground beneath his feet. James Mitchell did not stop being a firefighter that day. He still ran into burning buildings. He still risked his life to save others. But now when he walked into the flames, he no longer felt alone. He believed that every step, every breath, every moment was part of something greater. And it all began on a freezing January night, inside a burning house on Maple Street, when a woman chose faith over fear, and her peace lit a fire in his heart that would never burn out.